Right now, as you are watching this video, something happened just a few hours ago that most people have not fully processed yet. Israel and the United States struck South Pars. If you don't immediately know what that name means, here is why you should care. South Pars is not just a gas field, it is the single largest natural gas reserve on the entire planet Earth. It holds an estimated 1,800 trillion cubic feet of usable gas. To put that in perspective, that is more gas than most countries will ever need in multiple lifetimes. And today, on March 18, 2026, jets struck it. Fires broke out. Two refineries with a combined capacity of 100 million cubic meters of gas per day were taken offline. And within hours of that strike, Iran did something that should make every single person watching this stop and pay attention. They issued a public evacuation warning to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, telling workers at specific energy facilities to leave immediately because those sites are now, quote, direct and legitimate targets. Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery, Qatar's Ras Laffan complex, the UAE's Al Hosn gas field. These are not small facilities. These are the energy backbone of the entire Middle East. And Iran just put them all on a target list. That is where we are right now. Day 19 of this war, and I want to walk you through exactly what happened today, why it changes the math on how this conflict ends, and what it means for you sitting at home watching this. Not just as a geopolitical story, but as something that touches your gas prices, your electricity bill, and the global economy. Stay with me because this is going to be one of the most important breakdowns you watch today. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to Unlocked History Hub. We break down real events, real numbers, and real implications without the noise. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell notification so you never miss a video like this. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, that subscribe button takes 2 seconds and it helps us keep putting out content like this every single day. Now let's get into it. To understand why today's strike on South Pars is different from everything that came before it in this war, you need to understand what South Pars actually is and what it is connected to. This is not just an Iranian asset. South Pars sits in the Persian Gulf, and it is shared between Iran and Qatar. Qatar calls their side of the field the North Dome. What flows out of that field is not just energy for Iran, it is the source of most of Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports. Qatar is one of the world's largest LNG exporters. That means when you hit South Pars, you are not just hurting Iran, you are sending shockwaves through global LNG markets that reach Europe, Asia, and beyond. And here is the part that most mainstream outlets are glossing over. Before today, the US and Israel had been hitting military targets, missile sites, command infrastructure, radar systems, and leadership figures. They had deliberately avoided touching Iran's upstream energy production. That restraint had a strategic logic behind it. The calculation was that keeping the oil and gas flowing kept the Gulf states from completely turning against the operation and kept global energy markets from completely spiraling. That restraint ended today. The Israeli Air Force struck Iran's largest gas processing facility, and according to senior Israeli officials, the strike was carried out in coordination with the United States and with its consent. That detail matters enormously. This was not a rogue move. This was a deliberate, coordinated decision to cross a line that both governments had been standing behind for 19 days. In my view, that tells you something important about where this conflict is heading. The fact that they chose to cross this line today means either the military situation has become urgent enough to justify it, or the strategy has fundamentally shifted from limited pressure to something more total. Either way, the endgame of this war just got a lot less predictable. Now let me give you the immediate numbers because numbers do not lie. Within hours of the South Pars strike, Brent crude climbed more than 6% to over $109 a barrel. Europe's gas benchmark jumped more than 9%. Bloomberg confirmed those figures this afternoon. If you have been following oil prices over the past 3 weeks, you already know that Brent had already surged past $100 as the Strait of Hormuz was effectively shut down. Global oil supply is projected to fall by 8 million barrels per day just in March alone. The International Energy Agency has already released 400 million barrels from emergency reserves to calm markets. But here is the cold math. Global consumption runs at about 105 million barrels per day. 400 million barrels covers roughly 4 days of global demand. 4 days. That is the cushion the world is operating on while a war is being fought over the most important waterway on Earth. And now, on top of all of that, you have a strike on the world's largest gas field and a direct threat to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE's energy infrastructure. This is the moment I have been watching for in this conflict, because up until now, the Gulf states had been trying to stay out of the crossfire. Saudi Aramco reportedly evacuated workers from the Samref refinery after Iran's warning. That is not a diplomatic gesture. That is a real evacuation based on a real threat assessment. The Gulf states know Iran's capabilities. They have been watching Iranian drones and missiles land on their soil for weeks, and now Iran is telling them directly that their most valuable energy assets are in the crosshairs. Let me talk about what this means for Iraq, because this part of the story is getting almost zero coverage. Iran halted all gas supplies to Iraq today, following the South Pars strike. A senior Iraqi official confirmed this to Reuters. Iran supplies between 30 and 40% of Iraq's total electricity and gas needs. When those flows stop, Iraqi power plants start shutting down. And when power plants shut down in a country that already struggles with electricity reliability, you get blackouts on a scale that affects tens of millions of civilians. Iraq is not a party to this war. Iraqi civilians did not choose this conflict. And yet they are now sitting in the dark because of decisions made in Tel Aviv and Washington and Tehran. That is the human cost that gets lost when we only talk about military strikes and strategic calculations. Now, I want to give you my honest read on the strategic picture here because I think it is genuinely more complicated than either side wants to admit. On one hand, you can look at 19 days of this war and see real degradation of Iranian military capability. U.S. Central Command has reported that Iran's naval assets have been severely damaged. The IRGC's command and control structure has been disrupted. Key leadership figures have been eliminated. The regime is clearly under unprecedented pressure. Ali Larijani, Iran's de facto leader and Supreme National Security Council chief, was killed in strikes just yesterday. That is a massive blow to any coherent Iranian decision-making chain. When you lose senior leadership at that level, the people left making decisions are either unprepared, desperate, or both. And desperate decision-making under military pressure is how conflicts escalate in ways that no one originally planned for. But here is the other side of that picture. Iran has not stopped launching. Day 19 and they are still firing. The volume is down significantly compared to the opening days, when they launched over 160 missiles in a single wave. But the launches have not stopped. And Iran just demonstrated something important today. They still have the ability to escalate meaningfully. Threatening Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE simultaneously is not a small thing. If Iran follows through on even one of those threatened strikes against major Gulf energy infrastructure, the global economic consequences would be severe in a way that makes today's oil price spike look like a minor tremor before a major earthquake. Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq processing facility handles roughly 7% of global daily oil supply. It has been conspicuously absent from Iran's target list for 19 days. That absence has not been an accident. And now the question is whether today's South Pars strike and the desperation it might reflect in Tehran changes that calculation. Here is something worth sitting with. The 2019 drone attack on Abqaiq before this war, before any of this escalation, caused the single largest one-day oil price spike in modern history. One attack on one facility caused global prices to jump dramatically in a single day. That was in a relatively calm geopolitical environment. We are now operating in a world where the Strait of Hormuz is essentially shut down. Global reserves are being drawn down. The world's largest gas field just got struck, and Iran has explicitly named 4 additional energy targets in 3 different countries. If Abqaiq gets hit in this environment, the economic shockwave would be unlike anything we have seen in recent memory. Let me bring this back home for a moment because I think sometimes in the coverage of this war, the connection to American daily life gets lost. You have already felt this at the gas pump. Average gas prices in the U.S. have been climbing steadily since this conflict began on February 28th. Grocery prices are up because transportation costs are up. Heating costs are up in regions that rely on natural gas. These are not abstract global statistics. These are real dollars coming out of real American wallets every single week. And if this conflict escalates further, if Gulf energy infrastructure starts taking hits, if global LNG supply gets meaningfully disrupted, the economic pressure on American families gets significantly worse before it gets better. That is the real-world stakes of what is happening 7,000 miles away. And that is why this story matters to you personally, regardless of your politics. Now, what about the U.S. strategy going forward? Because I think today's South Pars strike signals a potential shift in how Washington is thinking about the endgame here. For 19 days, the operational logic seemed to be destroy Iran's military capability, keep the Strait open or as open as possible, avoid hitting energy infrastructure to limit global economic blowback, and hope that mounting military losses force Tehran towards some kind of negotiation or internal collapse. But striking South Pars today suggests that either that strategy is not working fast enough or the decision was made that the economic cost of Iran continuing to function at full energy revenue is now too high to ignore. Either way, it is a significant shift, and it carries real risk. Because when you go after the economic lifeblood of a regime that is already cornered, you remove some of the incentive that regime might have to hold back on its most extreme options. A government fighting for survival with nothing left to lose is a dangerous thing in a region with this much energy infrastructure and these many vulnerable targets. At the same time, the U.S. has been making moves to prepare the physical battlefield for the next phase. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, roughly 2,500 elite Marines, is currently en route from Japan. The USS Tripoli, USS New Orleans, and USS San Diego are part of that task force. Their expected mission is to help physically secure the Strait of Hormuz and address the underwater and fast boat threats that Iran has been using to disrupt commercial shipping. B-2 Spirit bombers, B-1B Lancers, F-15E Strike Eagles equipped with GBU-72 deep penetrator bombs have been hitting hardened Iranian targets along the coastline. The combination of air power neutralizing hard targets and Marines arriving to handle the asymmetric threats in the waterway suggests the U.S. is preparing for a sustained security presence around Hormuz rather than a quick exit. But that presence requires ammunition, and the forward ammunition supply situation across the Gulf is already under strain after 19 days of high-intensity operations. Here is the bottom line as I see it. Today was a turning point. Not because a gas field got hit, but because hitting it signals that both sides are moving further away from the conditions needed for a negotiated pause. Iran's immediate response, publicly naming energy targets in 3 U.S. allied countries, tells you that Tehran is not absorbing this quietly. They are escalating their threats in direct proportion to the strikes they are absorbing. And every country in the Gulf, every LNG buyer in Europe and Asia, every oil market trader in New York and London is now recalculating their risk models based on what happened in the last few hours. The war that started on February 28th as a military operation against specific Iranian capabilities has now entered a phase where global energy infrastructure is part of the equation on both sides. That is a different war than the one that started 19 days ago. And where it goes from here depends on decisions that will be made in the next 48 to 72 hours in war rooms and boardrooms and government offices across multiple continents. I want to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think today's South Pars strike pushes this war toward an ending faster? Or does it open a door to an escalation that nobody in Washington or Tel Aviv fully planned for? And if Iran follows through on those threats against Gulf energy sites, what does the world look like 6 months from now? I read every comment, and the discussions in this community are genuinely one of the best parts of putting this content out. If this breakdown gave you something real, share this video with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening right now. Most people are only getting the surface-level headlines. You just got the full picture. Share it because this story is too important to stay buried. We are Unlocked History Hub. Stay informed, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next one.